Part 2, sections 24 to 32 of All Things Are Possible by Lev Shestov. Translated by S. S. Koteliansky, 1888 to 1955. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 2, section 24. The source of originality. A man who has lost all hope of rooting out of himself a certain radical defect of character, or even of hiding the flaw from others, turns round and tries to find in his defect a certain merit. If he succeeds in convincing his acquaintances, he achieves a double gain. First, he quiets his conscience, and then he acquires a reputation for being original. 25. Men begin to strive towards great ends when they feel they cannot cope with the little tasks of life. They often have their measure of success. 26. A belch interrupts the loftiest meditation. You may draw a conclusion if you like. If you don't like, you needn't. 27. A woman of conviction. We forgive a man his convictions, however unwillingly. It goes without saying that we balk at any individual who believes in his own infallibility, but one must reconcile oneself with necessity. It is ugly and preposterous to have corns on one's hands, but still they can't be avoided in this unparadisal earth of sweat and labour. But why see an ideal in callosities? In practical life particularly, in the social political life to which we are doomed, convictions are a necessity. Unity is strength, and unity is possible only among people who think alike. Again, a deep conviction is in itself a strong force, far more powerful than the most logical argumentation. Sometimes one has only to pronounce in a full, round, vibrating chest voice, such as is peculiar to people of conviction, some trifling sentence, and an audience hitherto unconvinced is carried away. Truth is often dumb, particularly a new truth, which is most shy of people, and which has a feeble, hoarse voice. But in certain situations, that which will influence the crowd is more important than that which is genuine truth. Convictions are necessary to a public man. But he who is too clever to believe in himself entirely, and is not enough of an actor to look as if he believed, he had best give up public work altogether. At the same time he will realize that lack of convictions is not profitable, and will look with more indulgence on such as are bound to keep themselves well supplied. Yet all the more will he dislike those men who without any necessity disfigure themselves with the coarse tattoo marks. And particularly he will object to such women. What can be more intolerable than a woman of conviction? She lives in a family, without having to grind for her daily bread. Why disfigure herself? Why wilfully rub her hands into corns when she might keep them clean and pretty? Women, moreover, usually pick up their convictions ready-made from the man who interests them most at the moment. And never do they do this so vigorously as when the man himself seems incapable of paving the way to his ideas. They are full of feeling for him, they rush to the last extremities of resource. Will not their feeble little fists help him? It may be touching, but in the end it is intolerable. So it is much pleasanter to meet a woman who believes in her husband and does not consider it necessary to help him. She can then dispense with convictions. 28. Emancipation of women. The one and only way of mastering an enemy is to learn the use of his weapons. Starting from this, modern woman, weary of being the slave of man, tries to learn all his tricks. Hard is slavery, wonderful is freedom. Slavery at last is so unendurable that a human being will sacrifice everything for freedom. Of what use are his virtues to a prisoner languishing in prison? He has one aim, one object, to get out of prison, and he values only such qualities in himself as will assist his escape. If it is necessary to break an iron grating by physical force, then strong muscles will seem to the prisoner the most desirable of all things. If cunning will help him, cunning is the finest thing on earth. Something the same happens with woman. She became convinced that man owed his priority chiefly to education and a trained mind, so she threw herself on books and universities. Learning that promises freedom is light, everything else darkness. Of course it is a delusion, but you could never convince her of it, for that would mean the collapse of her best hopes of freedom. But in the end, woman will be as well informed as man, she will furnish herself with broad views and unshakable convictions, with a philosophy also, and in the end she may even learn to think logically. Then probably the many misunderstandings between the sexes will cease. But heavens, how tedious it will be! Men will argue, women will argue, children will probably be born fully instructed, understanding everything. With what pain will the men of the future view our women, capricious, frivolous, uninformed creatures, understanding nothing and desiring to understand nothing. A whole half of the human race neither would nor could have any understanding. But the hope lies there. Maybe we can do without understanding. Perhaps a logical mind is not an attribute, but a curse. In the struggle for existence, however, and the survival of the fittest, not a few of the best human qualities have perished. Obviously, woman's illogicality is also destined to disappear. It is 1,000 pities. 29. All kinds of literature are good, except the tedious, said Voltaire. We may enlarge the idea. All men and all activities are good, except the tedious. Whatever your failings and your vices, if you are only amusing or interesting, all is forgiven you. Accordingly, frankness and naturalness are quite rightly considered doubtful virtues. If people say that frankness and naturalness are virtues, always take it cum grano salis. Sometimes it is permissible and even opportune to fire off truth of all sorts. Sometimes one may stretch oneself like a log across the road. But God forbid that such sincere practices should be raised into a principle. To out with the truth at all times, always to reveal oneself entirely, besides being impossible to accomplish, never having been accomplished, even in the confessions of the greatest men, is moreover a far more risky business than it seems. I can confidently assert that if any man tried to tell the whole truth about himself, not metaphorically, for every metaphor is a covering ornament, but in plain, bare words, that man would ruin himself forever, for he would lose all interest in the eyes of his neighbours, and even in his own eyes. Each of us bears in his soul a heavy wound, and knows it, yet carries himself, must carry himself, as if he were aware of nothing, while all around keep up the pretence. Remember Lermontov. Look, around you playfully the crowd moves on the usual road, scarce a mark of trouble on the festive faces, not one indecent tear. And yet is barely one amongst them but is crushed by heavy torture, or has gathered the wrinkles of young age, save from crime or loss. These words are horribly true, and the really horrible should be concealed. It frightens one off. I admit Byron and Lermontov could make it alluring. But all that is alluring depends on vagueness, remoteness. Any monster may be beautiful in the distance. And no man can be interesting unless he keep a certain distance between himself and people. Women do not understand this. If they like a man, they try to come utterly near to him, and are surprised that he does not meet their frankness with frankness, and admit them to his holy of holies. But in the innermost sanctuary the only beauty is inaccessibility. As a rule, it is not a sanctuary but a lair, where the wounded beast in man has run to lick his wounds. And shall this be done in public? People generally, and women particularly, ought to be given something positive. In books one may still sing the praise of wounds, hopelessness and despair, whatever you like, for books are still literature, a conventionality. But to strip one's anguish in the open market, to confess an incurable disease to others, this is to kill one's soul, not to relieve it. All, even the best men, have some aversion for you. Perhaps in the interest of order and decorum, they will grant you a not too important place in their philosophy of life. For in a philosophy of life, as in a cemetery, a place is prepared for each and all, and everyone is welcome. There also are enclosures where rubbish is dumped to rot. But for those who have as yet no desire to be fitted into a world philosophy, I would advise them to keep their tongue between their teeth, or like Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, take to literature. To a writer, in books and only in books, all is permitted provided he has talent. but in actual living even a writer must not let loose too much, lest people should guess that in his books he is telling the truth. 30. Poushkin asserts that the poet himself can and must be the judge of his own work. Are you content, exacting artist? Content, then let the mob revile. It is needless to argue against this, for how could you prove that the supreme verdict belongs not to the poet himself, but to public opinion? Nor for that matter can we prove Poushkin right. We must agree or disagree as we like, but we cannot reject the evidence. Whether you like it or not, Poushkin was evidently satisfied with his own work, and did not need his readers' sanction. Happy man! And it seems to me he owed his happiness exclusively to his inability to pass beyond certain limits. I doubt if all poets would agree to repeat Poushkin's verse quoted above. I decidedly refuse to believe that Shakespeare, for instance, after finishing Hamlet or King Lear, could have said to himself, I, who judge my work more strictly than any other can judge, am satisfied. I do not think he can even have thought for a moment of the merits of his works, Hamlet or King Lear. To Shakespeare after Hamlet, the word satisfied must have lost all its meaning, and if he used it, it was only by force of habit, as we sometimes call to a dead person. His own works must have seemed to him imperfect, mean, pitiful, like the sob of a child or the moaning of a sick man. He gave them to the theatre, and most probably was surprised that they had any success. Perhaps he was glad that his tears were of some use, if only for amusing and instructing people. And probably in this sense the verdict of the crowd was dearer to him than his own verdict. He could not help accusing his own offspring. Thank heaven other people acquitted it. True, they acquitted it because they did not understand or understood imperfectly, but this did not matter. Use every man after his desert, and who should 'scape a whipping, asked Hamlet. Shakespeare knew that a strict tribunal would reject his works, for they contained so many terrible questions, and not one perfect answer. Could anyone be satisfied at that rate? Perhaps with Comedy of Errors, Twelfth Night, or even Richard III. But after Hamlet a man may find rest only in his grave. To speak the whole truth, I doubt if Poushkin himself maintained the view we have quoted till the end of his days, or even if he spoke all he felt when he wrote the poem in 1830. Possibly he felt how little a poet can be satisfied with his work, but pride prevented his admitting it, and he tried to console himself with his superiority over the crowd, which is undeniably a right thing to do. Insults, and Poushkin had to endure many, are answered with contempt. And woe to the poor wretch who feels impelled to justify his contempt by his own merits, according to the strict voice of conscience. Such niceness is dangerous and unnecessary. If a man would preserve his strength and his confidence, he must give up magnanimity, he must learn to despise people, and even if he cannot despise them, he must have the air of one who would not give a pin's head for anybody. He must appear always content. Poushkin was a clever man and a deep nature. 31. Metaphysics against their will. It often occurs to us that evil is not altogether so unnecessary after all. Diseases, humiliations, miseries, deformity, failure, and all the rest of those plants which flourish with such truly tropical luxuriance on our planet are probably essential to man. Poets sing plentifully of sorrow. Nous sommes les apprentis, la douleur est notre maître, said de Musset. On this subject everybody can bring forth a quotation, not only from the philosophers, who are a cold, heartless tribe, but from tender, gentle, or sentimental poets. Doubtless one knows many instances where suffering has profited a man. True also, one knows many cases of the direct opposite. And these are all cases of profound, earnest, outrageous, incredibly outrageous suffering. Look at Tchekhov's men and women, plainly drawn from life, or at any rate exceedingly lifelike. Uncle Vanya, an old man of 50, cries beside himself all over the stage, "My life is done for, my life is done for," and senselessly shoots at a harmless professor. The hero in A Tedious Story was a quiet, happy man, engaged in work of real importance, when suddenly a horrible disease stole upon him, not killing him, but taking him between its loathsome jaws. But what for? Then Tchekhov's girls and women, they are mostly young, innocent, fascinating. And always there lies in wait for them round every corner a meaningless, rude, ugly misery which murders even the most modest hopes. They sob bitterly, but fate takes no notice. How explain such horrors? Tchekhov is silent. He does not weep himself, he left off long ago. And besides, it is a humiliating thing for a grown-up person to do. Setting one's teeth, it is necessary either to keep silent or to explain. Well, metaphysics undertakes the explanation. Where common sense stops, metaphysics must take another stride. We have seen, it says, many instances where at first glance suffering seemed absurd and needless, but where later on a profound significance was revealed. Thus it may be that what we cannot explain may find its explanation in time. "Life is lost," cries Uncle Vanya. "Life is done for," repeat the voices of girls innocently perishing. Yet nothing is lost. The very horror which a drowning man experiences goes to show that the drowning is nothing final. It is only the beginning of greater events. The less a man has fulfilled in experience, the more in him remains of unsatisfied passion and desire, the greater are the grounds for thinking that his essence cannot be destroyed, but must manifest itself somehow or other in the universe. Voluntary asceticism and self-denial, such common human phenomena, help to solve the riddle. Nobody compels a man, he imposes suffering and abstinence on himself. It is an incomprehensible instinct, but still an instinct which, rooted in the depths of our nature, prompts us to a decision repugnant to reason. Renounce life, save yourself. The majority of men do not hear or do not heed the prompting. And then nature, which cannot rely on our sensibility, has recourse to violence. She shows glimpses of paradise to us in our youth, awakens hopes and impossible desires, and at the moment of our supreme expectation, she shows us the hollowness of our hope. Nearly every life can be summed up in a few words. Man was shown heaven and thrown into the mud. We are all ascetics, voluntary or involuntary. Here on earth dreams and hopes are only awakened, not fulfilled. And he who has endured most suffering, most privation, will awaken in the afterwards most keenly alive. Such long speeches metaphysics whispers to us. And we repeat them, often leaving out the "it may be." Sometimes we believe them, and forge our philosophies from them. Even we go so far as to assert that had we the power we would change nothing, absolutely nothing in the world. And yet, if by some miracle such power came into our hands, how triumphantly we would send to the devil all philosophies and lofty world conceptions, all ideals and metaphysics, and plainly and simply, without reflection, abolish sufferings, deformities, failures, all those things to which we attach such a high educational value, abolish them from the face of the earth. We are fed up, oh, how fed up we are with carrying on our studies. But it can't be helped. Faute de mieux, let us keep on inventing systems, thinking them out. But let us agree not to be cross with those who don't want to have anything to do with our systems. Really, they have a perfect right. 32. Old age must be respected, so all say, even the old. And the young willingly meet the demand. But in such spontaneous, even often emphatic respect, is there not something insulting to old age? Every young man by his voluntary deference seems to say, and still the rising star shines brighter than the setting. And the old, accepting the respect, are well aware that they can count on nothing more. The young are attentive and respectful to the old, only upon the express condition that the latter shall behave like old people, and stand aside from life. Let a real man try to follow Faust's example, and what a shindy there will be. The old, being as a rule helpless, are compelled to bow to public opinion, and behave as if their only interests were the interests of righteousness, good name, and such like Platonic attributes. Only a few go against the convention, and these are monsters and degenerates. We do not wish old men to have desires, so that life is arranged as if old men desired nothing. This, of course, is no great matter. Even the young are compelled to be satisfied with less than nothing in our system. We are not out to meddle with human rights. Our point is that science and philosophy take enforced appearances for reality. Grey hair is supposed to be a sure sign of victory over the passions. Hence, seeing that we must all come to grey hairs, therefore the ultimate business of man is to overcome the passions. On this granite foundation whole systems of philosophy are built. It is not worth while quarrelling with a custom. Let us continue to pay respect to old age. But let us look in other directions for philosophic bases. It is time to open a free road to the passions even in the province of metaphysics. End of Part Two, Section 32. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.